Okay, in this video, I'm going to go over some of the UV basics. Had a few questions in the Discord group about UVs, and so I figured I'd go over some of the basics of UVs. So, okay, let's pretend like this is a sleeve, okay, or a skirt, and I've done all the normal things. I've duplicated the faces. I've bridged it, I combined it. I bridged the gap between the inner and the outer, and I reversed the inner so that it's facing the correct way. Okay, but one of the things that happens when you do all that is you end up with something like this. Okay, if we go to UV shell and we select that, it all moves as one, and what that means is going to happen is that the outer and inner, say you want a different texture on the inside, well, they're all overlapping each other. The outer and the inner are taking up exactly the same space, and not only that, the bridge part here is that line right there, which means these faces here are going to get absolutely no UV space whatsoever. Okay. So I'm going to show you how to fix all that. Oops. Okay. So there's several different ways you can go about it. One way would be to, well, probably the easiest way, but I'm going to show you a couple of different ways of doing it, because you're going to run into different problems doing it different ways, and sometimes it's easier to select the faces manually, like this. I'm going to hit the Q on the keyboard to get into select mode and then select them manually, but sometimes you got a ton of faces there, so there's all different ways you can do it. You can use the brush tool and select faces that way. That's lots of times a lot faster. So there's all different ways you can do that. There's always 10 different ways you can do the same thing in Maya. Some of them are faster in certain circumstances than others. Okay. Okay, so let's say we want to make the inner faces. Okay, this is one UV island. Okay. Or UV shell. UV island and UV shell are the same thing. It's one object in the UV space. Okay, UV editor. What we could do is we could go into edge mode and say we want the inner to be different. So we can double click on that. I'm going to hit the Q on the keyboard, so I'm not going to move anything. And we can see we have 20 edges selected. And then if we come down here and double click on that, now we have 40 edges selected. And if you come here to cut and sew, and you simply do split, okay, now if we go into UV shell and we select and hit the W on the keyboard to move, now we have two separate islands. Okay. We have two separate islands now. Okay, so you can do it that way. A lot of times that will be a lot easier. Now we have, okay, now I'm going to do it a different way. Okay, I'm going to Control Z back to where it's one shell again. Okay, so it's one shell again. And let's say you can select the edges again. Double click. Double click. Okay. And now if I went to select, convert selection to faces, now we have all the inner faces selected, but we also have this ring here selected of faces. Now what you could then do is you could hold down the shift key, and while you're holding down the shift key on your keyboard, press the lesser than symbol or the comma key on your keyboard, same thing, and it contracted the selection, so now we have all the interfaces selected again. Okay, but we don't have an edge selected, we have the inners selected. So if you went to cut and sew and did split, what's going to happen is if we then go to UV shell, this is an individual UV shell. So now we have a whole bunch of islands. Okay, we could select this outer one. Let's move it over there. Okay, so that's the outside. And we still have the inside, but see, you notice these lines are thicker. Okay, that means they're all separate UV shells. The UV shell borders are denoted by white, thicker lines. Okay. Now this is real easy to fix. All you have to do is go to UVs, select all these, and then just go cut, sew, merge. Okay, so now this is a UV shell, and this is a UV shell. Okay, now we get to the problem of what to do with this bridge or this lip, you know, where the thickness of the fabric, you know. Well, let's see, if we go to edge and we select this edge here, okay, we can simply drag that edge up a little bit. Okay, and now we need to select this edge here and drag it up a little bit, but watch what happens over here. See, it's dragging this side up over here as well. Okay, so what you do in that case is you just go to select and you go convert selection to UVs, and then you hold down the control key and you deselect these over here, and now you can pull this up, and now they're not overlapping each other. And we didn't change the size of this, you know, so the outer and inner still have the same same percentage of the UV space. So if you were going to use the same texture on the outside and on the inside, but you wanted the inside to be shaded, you could have two different textures of the identical textures in these UV spaces, but then you could shade the interior to be a different shading, you know, or color or whatever you wanted to do. Okay, so then we'll do the same thing on the bottom here. And I'm going to go back into edge mode, double click, and drag this down just a little bit. Try to make them square. You can make them however. The bigger the space you use, the more higher resolution the texture will be in that one area. And then we'll double click on this. And here, let me move this so you might be able to see it just slightly better. If I go to edge, now watch the color change here when I double click. See, it's changed its color. It's the selection color. Okay, just to show you that you can see it's actually selected. Okay, so I'm going to Control Z back so that these are still lined up with one another. If you wanted to have the same texture on both sides, they'll be lined up nicer. Then you can just copy and paste the texture here in Photoshop and move it over to here so it's taking up the same space. It's just a clone or a copy of this texture here. That way you can paint this shade in. You can put shadows in on this side. This is the interior. Okay, so let's do this again. Double click there, and then we're going to convert it to UVs. Hold down the control key to deselect those, and then we can drag that down. Okay, so now we have our textures. There's nothing that's overlapping on each other or anything like that, and so everything should texture very nicely. Let's go into another potential issue that you might end up having. Okay, so I'm going to pull this over here. Okay, so let me zoom out a little bit. Okay, the normal UV space for Second Life is 0 to 1 in V and 0 to 1 in U. So this is U and this is V, okay? But let's say we wanted to, that this is the only things that are on this texture, right? And you're like, well, this is too small. I don't want to waste all this texture here. Hit R on the keyboard to go into scale mode. And then I'm going to scale up, okay, till where it's much bigger. W to move. You know, and you're like, okay, that's much better, but this here, if I bring it inside the UV space, it's overlapping now, okay? So what you could do is you could make these, scale these up as big as they'll go without going over the edges of the UV space, okay? And you can then take this one here and you can move it over into this space here. You could actually move it into any of these other squares. It doesn't matter. Okay, so let's move it over here into this square space. Now this is 1 to 2 and 1 to 2 and 1 to 1 on here. Second Life doesn't care if it's not in the UV space. It's going to treat this square as if it's this square. So to make this work, and you want two different textures, is, you know, you go into face mode, right? Now we have the faces selected. Okay, and this is the faces are all selected on the interior. Hold down your right mouse button and you'll assign a new material. I'm just going to assign a Lambert. Okay, and let's name this Lambert B. Okay, now we have another Lambert on the outside, which is Lambert 1, and so this is Lambert 1. Okay, this is Lambert 1, and this is Lambert B, but Second Life uses alphabetical when it's determining what's going to be face 0 and what's going to be, you know, the order of the faces. It does it by whatever the name of the Lambert is. So unfortunately, all the other versions of MyIKnow, you could come in here and find Lambert 1 and rename Lambert 1 to Lambert A. And now you have AB. A would be face 0 in Second Life, and B would be face 1. But for some reason, it doesn't like that. So I'm going to, if I go to UV shell, I can select the UV shell, and I'll create another Lambert. Okay. Now I could either name this Lambert A, and this would then become face 0 in Second Life, or I could name it Lambert C, and now in Attribute Editor, and we're in object mode, we can see we have Lambert C and we have Lambert B. Lambert B being closer to the alphabetical, you know, in the alphabetical order would be the first face. So this would be face 0 and this would be face 1. And I guess theoretically you could have named it Lambert 2. So Lambert 1, I mean, could have left it Lambert 2. So Lambert 1, I think, would be face 0, because alphabetically it would be the first one alphabetically, and Lambert 2 with the number 2 would be the second one, which would be face 1. I think. I haven't tried that out yet. But alphabetically that should be, because now you're combining letters and numbers together. So theoretically, alphabetically wise, that should be the face 0 and face 1, but it does it through alphabetically, you know. But if you just rename A and B, now you can't name this to Lambert because Maya doesn't like having numbers at the beginning of stuff. We could say B2 and there's B2. You can have numbers in names, but just not at the beginning. Or if this was A, this would be face 0 and this would be face 1. Okay. Let me see. Let me pause it for a quick second. There's something else I want to show you real quick. Hold on. Let me get things set up. Okay. So let's say we have a situation where we want to have these on the exact same spot in the UV space, but on two separate tiles here. These are called tiles. You know, this is the main tile that Second Life only cares about the UV space. And so, but say you want the second one to be exactly on the same spot that this one's at. Hold on, let me line them up real quick. Okay. Okay, so here we are in UV shell. Okay, UV shell. We have that selected. If you hold down the D key and the V key, that's for point, and then your middle mouse button to move the pivot point. And now if you hold down the middle mouse, the V key to snap to point, and we should be able to move. Why isn't it snapping? We should be able to snap these to there. Why isn't it snapping though? There it goes. Okay. Yeah, what I was messing up was, okay. Let's Control Z back. Hold down the D key and the V key and hold down the middle mouse button and drag it over that corner. Okay. Then hold down the V key and just use your left mouse button. Oh, sorry. Hold on. DV, middle mouse button. Okay. V key. And then just drag it over. Okay, so now they're lined up exactly on top of each other. Okay, and say we want this one. Okay, so what I did was I just held the V key down, which is snap, and then held down my middle mouse button, not the middle mouse button, my left mouse button, and just dragged it over. So you can snap it to any one of these vertices or UVs. Okay, so now they're taking up the same exact space. So now we want to move the one that we have selected. We want to move it exactly over so that it's taking up the same exact UV space over here, just one over. Okay, so this is where we change this to 1.0. Okay, and if you hit this key, this button here, it moves it exactly 1 over that way. So now over here, even though it's over in this tile, it's taking up, Second Life is going to think of it as if it's taking up the exact same UV space. Okay, and I could go up 1 and it's still taking up the same space. You know, I can go over to the left, same space, down, same space. Will it do it that way? Yep, same space if you want to go on a diagonal. So it doesn't matter. So if you have multiple UVs and you're going to be using multiple materials, this way you don't have to have them overlapping each other. And the benefit of doing it this way and lining them up first is, say we're going to use the same exact texture, fabric pattern or whatever on the outside and on the inside, but you want to have the inside where you, in Photoshop, you add or another program like 3D Coat or Substance Painter, and you're going to be adding shadowing to the other texture. This way you could take your original texture that you're going to use on the outside, you can duplicate it, save it as a second file, open it up in Photoshop or Substance Painter or what have you, your duplicate file, and then you can do whatever you want to it. You can add shadows and do whatever you want. What this will mean is that because these UVs are taking up the same exact space, the pattern that's on the outside, and you're starting with the same actual texture, and these are taking up the same texture spaces, you've just duplicated the texture so that you could draw on shading or shadowing or whatever you wanted to do on it. It would mean that in Second Life, it would look like like what you think of clothing fabric. When you look on the outside and the inside, they're going to match up to be in the same position. Just one's on the outside, one's on the inside, but they're actually technically two separate textures. So that will help you a lot. So that's why I wanted to teach you this move. You know, you got to change that to 1 so it moves it over exactly. You just, if they are going to be taking up the same space, you want to line them up so that they're exactly the same space. Have one of the UV islands selected, and then just use this to click it over. It's very simple. You see how it is. And retain component spacing is on. We could have had, instead of having an island selected, say you have the UV selected, and because retain component spacing is on, it keeps the spacing. Okay. The other thing, okay, so that was that. Let's see, the other thing, when we were moving things around, okay, when we were pulling these out, you know, to make these correct here, make sure that in your tool settings that step snap is turned off, because if it is, whoops, if step snap is turned on, it's gonna mess you up. Oh, let's see. Now this is all getting messed up. Let me reset the tool. What's going on here? Move tool. I don't have anything selected. Okay. Move tool. Okay, let's reset the tool. Oh, that's weird. This was on a minute ago. Step snapping. Now it doesn't show that step snapping. Component selection. That's weird. Now it shows you object. Hold on. Let me find where I was. Okay. I wasn't in UV selection. UV selection has this step snapping. And this is for scaling. Okay. So if you were going to scale things, if this is set on, if this is turned on, you know, if it's turned on, let's go to move. Okay, if that is turned on, you want to turn it off. Or if you were scaling and you know, step snap was turned on, then you want to make sure it's off. And it's the same sort of thing here, where you have, you know, snap to certain things of certain sizes, you know, transform, constraint. But yeah, you can have something set so that it only will, oh, here it is, step snap. If this was turned on, you know, and you had that, and you were trying to scale something and nothing's happening, you know, it's probably because you have that constraint turned on. So that can be a problem. And even in the move tool, like I said, if step snap was on, it wouldn't, you'd be like, I'm trying to drag it, but it's not going anywhere. That's because step snap was on. So just make sure you have that turned off. See, it's not on by default, but sometimes you can accidentally turn that on. Sometimes it's good to have step snapping on. Like we could have had step snapping here turned on, and so that when you turn it on, so that when we drag these upwards, they move at the same increment. Okay, like that's obviously too big. We could have gone like 0, 1, right? And then we could have, see, it's going by steps. See, that's probably too small. So let's try 0.0. Let's do 4. Okay. Now, I'm showing you this because, see, now it's times that. That's probably too much. 3. Okay. So step snapping is good in that, that's better. In that we could have set that to 3. And remember when I pulled up that edge, it would have moved it up 3. And then when we pulled this edge, it would have moved up 3, and these would have been identical. Absolutely 100%. So that's what step snapping is for, is that if you want to move something a very specific distance, and you want to make sure that you get consistency on these tops and bottoms here, you could turn on step snapping. But if your step snapping is set to, you know, something like 1, and you're like trying to move it, and it's like, it's not moving, you got to draw it way up there before it moves, and you're like, it's moving way too much, why is it doing that? It's because of this. It's, you know, you just turn it off. Okay. Retain component spacings. That means everything that you have selected will move together as one, instead of separate, especially on scaling. But yeah, retain component spacing is another thing. It just keeps everything, whatever, or, you know, into it doesn't change the overall relationship. It doesn't, you know, so to the way it looks. I use retain component spacing a lot. I'm just trying to think of a good example, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Anyway, these are supposed to just be the basics of UVs. And so, yeah, so these are all the basics of UVs that you really need to know. And yeah, so awesome. I hope that really helps you out there. So have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.